In the rural village of Bredwardine, nestled within the undulating hills and dense woodlands of the Welsh marches, whispers of the undead were an ever-present echo. Whenever misfortune befell the villagers, whether it was a sudden outbreak of plague or the mysterious deaths of their cattle, their thoughts invariably turned to the dark legends of vampires that had haunted their community for generations. And so, the hunt for the living dead began anew. It was the late autumn of 1734 when the latest wave of dread swept through Bredwardine. A virulent sickness had taken hold, claiming the lives of several villagers in a matter of days. Livestock, too, began to perish inexplicably, their carcasses found bloodless and cold in the morning light. Panic gripped the hearts of the villagers, who believed with all their superstitious fervor that a vampire was among them, preying on their kin and creatures alike. The villagers gathered in the small, damp church at the heart of Bredwardine, where Father Gwilym, the village priest, stood before them with a somber expression. The wooden pews creaked under the weight of anxious bodies as he spoke. "My children," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "we are faced with a grave evil. We must follow the old ways to rid ourselves of this curse." The old ways. The phrase sent a shiver through the crowd, for everyone knew what it entailed. When such calamities struck, the first step was to exhumate the last person who had died in the village. In this case, it was Ellen Reese, a young woman who had succumbed to a sudden fever a fortnight prior. Ellen's death had been a blow to the village. She was beloved by many, and her passing was mourned deeply. Yet, in times of desperation, sentimentality gave way to fear and superstition. That very night, under a sickle moon and a sky spangled with cold, indifferent stars, a group of men led by Father Gwilym made their way to the cemetery. The ground was hard with the first frost of winter, and the shovels bit into the earth with a dull thud. The air was filled with the smell of damp soil and the distant cry of an owl, an eerie accompaniment to their grim task. Hours passed before they finally reached Ellen's coffin. With a collective breath, they lifted the wooden lid, revealing the young woman's body. To their horror, Ellen's face, which should have been pale and sunken with death, was flushed with an unnatural rosiness. Her lips were tinged red, as if she had fed recently. The villagers recoiled in fear, muttering prayers and crossing themselves. Father Gwilym, though shaken, knew what had to be done. He produced a wooden stake and a mallet, tools of the ancient ritual. As he positioned the stake over Ellen's heart, the gathered crowd held their breath. The hammer came down, once, twice, 3 times, each blow echoing in the still night. Ellen's body convulsed violently, a ghastly, gurgling sound escaping her throat before she lay still once more. The villagers sighed in relief, believing they had vanquished the evil. But their relief was short-lived. In the days that followed, the deaths continued. Cattle were still found drained of blood, and the sickness showed no signs of abating. Desperation turned to paranoia, and whispers of more vampires spread like wildfire. In the midst of this chaos, an old woman named Katrin stepped forward. Known for her knowledge of herbal remedies and ancient lore, Katrin was both respected and feared. She claimed that the true vampires still walked among them and that they had only succeeded in angering it by disturbing Ellen's grave. "We must seek the source of this evil," she warned, her voice rasping with age and conviction. "Only then can we hope to end this curse." Reluctantly, the villagers agreed. Katrin led a small group of the bravest souls deep into the forest, to a place long shunned by the villagers, a forgotten crypt hidden among the roots of an ancient yew tree. It was said to be the resting place of Godok the Black, a warlord from centuries past who had been rumored to practice dark magic and feast on the blood of his enemies. The crypt's entrance was overgrown and nearly invisible, but Katrin found it with an uncanny ease. They pried open the heavy stone door, releasing a gust of foul air that made them gag. Inside, the darkness was thick, oppressive, and silent as the grave. They lit torches and descended the crumbling steps, each footfall echoing ominously. The crypt was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and dusty chambers, filled with the bones of the long dead. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and an inexplicable sense of dread settled over them. Finally, they reached the innermost chamber, where a grand sarcophagus lay, adorned with faded runes and dark symbols. Katrin approached the sarcophagus, her hands trembling. "This is it," she whispered, "the resting place of Godok the Black." With great effort, they pushed the lid aside, revealing a sight that made their blood run cold. Godok's body lay within, perfectly preserved, as if he had just fallen asleep. His skin was pale and waxy, his eyes closed. But it was the stench of decay and the aura of malevolence that confirmed their worst fears. Before they could react, Kadok's eyes snapped open, glowing with an unholy light. His lips curled into a sinister smile, revealing sharp, glistening fangs. The villagers screamed, stumbling back in terror. But it was too late. Kadok rose from his coffin with a speed and grace that defied his ancient appearance, his laughter echoing through the crypt. "You thought you could banish me?" he hissed, his voice a chilling rasp. "Fools, I am eternal. I am the night." Panic ensued as Kadok lunged at them, his movements a blur. One by one, they fell under his savage attack, their screams echoing through the crypt and into the night. Only Katrin remained, clutching a vial of holy water and a crucifix, her eyes wide with terror but filled with resolve. "This is not the end," she vowed, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her heart. "We will find a way to stop you." Kadok laughed, a dark, mocking sound. "Try if you must, old woman. But know this, you cannot kill what is already dead. And your village is mine." As the last of her companions fell, Katrin hurled the holy water at Kadok, who recoiled with a furious hiss, and she ran away. Katrin stumbled out of the forest just as dawn was breaking. The first rays of light cast a golden hue over Bredwardine, painting a deceptively serene picture. Exhausted and terrified, she made her way to Father Gwilym's house. She pounded on the door, her heart racing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The door creaked open, revealing the priest's concerned face. "Katrin, what has happened? Where are the others?" he asked, his voice trembling with fear and concern. "We were wrong," Katrin gasped, clutching the doorframe for support. "It's not over. The true evil has awoken. Kadok the Black. He's back." Father Gwilym's eyes widened in horror. He quickly ushered her inside, bolting the door behind them. "Tell me everything," he urged. As Katrin recounted the harrowing events in the crypt, Father Gwilym listened intently, his face growing paler with each passing moment. When she finished, a heavy silence hung in the air. "We need to warn the village," Father Gwilym said finally, his voice resolute. "But we must also find a way to stop Kadok. There must be something in the old texts, some way to banish him for good." Katrin nodded, though her mind was filled with doubt. The ancient tomes in the church's library were filled with fragments of forgotten lore and cryptic prophecies, but would they hold the key to defeating a being as powerful as Kadok? Together, they set to work, poring over the dusty volumes by the flickering light of a single candle. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. The villagers, unaware of the dire threat, went about their day, oblivious to the darkness that loomed on the horizon. As afternoon turned to evening, Katrin found something a passage in an old, leather-bound book that spoke of a ritual to bind a vampire spirit. It required rare ingredients and a blood sacrifice, but it was their only hope. "We need wolfsbane, the ashes of a yew tree, and the blood of a willing sacrifice," Katrin read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "It says the ritual must be performed at the place of the vampire's awakening, during the hour of the dead." Father Gwilym frowned. "The hour of the dead? That's midnight. We have little time to prepare." The two hurriedly gathered what they could. Wolfsbane grew at the edge of the forest, and they knew the old yew tree could provide the ashes they needed. The blood sacrifice, however, was a grim prospect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, Katrin and Father Gwilym returned to the crypt. The villagers, sensing their urgency and fear, began to gather, demanding answers. "There is no time to explain," Father Gwilym called out, trying to calm the growing crowd. "Return to your homes, bar your doors, and do not come out until dawn." But fear had taken root, and the villagers followed them to the crypt, unwilling to let the two face the darkness alone. Inside the crypt, the air was thick with tension. They prepared the ritual, spreading wolfsbane and ashes in a circle around Kadok's sarcophagus. The vampire's body lay still, but an unnatural energy pulsed from it, filling the room with a palpable sense of dread. "Who will offer their blood?" Father Gwilym asked, his voice echoing in the cold, stone chamber. A heavy silence followed his question. The villagers exchanged fearful glances, each one hoping someone else would step forward. "I will," a voice finally broke the silence. It was David, a young farmer known for his bravery and kindness. He stepped into the circle, his face set with determination. "If my blood can save this village, then so be it." Father Gwilym nodded solemnly, handing David a small, ceremonial dagger. You are a true hero, David. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. As the clock struck midnight, they began the ritual. Catherine chanted the ancient words, her voice rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence. David sliced his palm with the dagger, letting his blood drip onto the vampire's body. The blood hissed and sizzled on Kadok's cold skin, and the vampire's eyes snapped open, filled with fury. A wind howled through the crypt, extinguishing their torches. In the darkness, Kadok's voice rang out, a chilling, otherworldly sound. You think you can bind me? You are fools. I will not be imprisoned again. But Catherine continued the chant, her voice growing louder, more insistent. The circle of wolfsbane and ashes began to glow, trapping Godok within. The vampire thrashed and screamed, but he could not break free. Finally, with a final, deafening roar, Kadok's body erupted in flames. The villagers watched in awe and terror as the vampire was consumed, leaving only ashes in his wake. The silence that followed was heavy, almost tangible. The villagers stared at the remains of Godok the Black, scarcely believing what they had witnessed. We did it, Father Gwillem whispered, his voice filled with relief and exhaustion. The evil is gone. But as they made their way back to the village, a sense of unease lingered. They had defeated Godok, but at what cost? And as the first light of dawn broke over Bredwardine, a chilling realization dawned on Catherine. The ritual had required the blood of a willing sacrifice, but it had not specified that the sacrifice would survive. David's wound, though small, had festered unnaturally quickly, his skin around it turning a sickly gray. Catherine's heart sank as she realized that the battle against the darkness was far from over. For in the shadows of the forest, something else was stirring. An ancient evil, far older and more powerful than Godok, had sensed the disruption. The villagers had faced a vampire, but what awaited them was a horror beyond their darkest nightmares. And so, as Bredwardine's inhabitants slept fitfully in their beds, dreaming of peace that seemed just out of reach, a new terror prepared to descend upon them. The true nightmare was only beginning. As the days turned to weeks, the initial relief that had swept through Bredwardine began to wane. The sickness that had taken hold of David spread, and despite Catherine's and Father Gwillem's best efforts, they could not halt its advance. What had begun as a small wound on his palm soon turned into a festering infection that no herb or prayer could cure. David, once the brave hero, grew weaker with each passing day, his skin growing paler, his eyes hollow and sunken. The villagers watched in despair as their hope waned with David's health. The shadow of Kadok's curse seemed to linger, an ominous reminder that their victory had come at a terrible price. Rumors and whispers filled the air, fear creeping back into the hearts of the people. One cold, moonless night, as a biting wind howled through the village, David's condition took a turn for the worse. He thrashed in his bed, caught in the grip of fevered dreams. Catherine and Father Gwillem stayed by his side, but there was little they could do but offer comfort in his final moments. It's spreading, David muttered, his voice barely audible. Something darker, is coming. His eyes glazed over, and with a final, shuddering breath, he was gone. The village mourned him deeply, but their sorrow soon turned to terror. That night, a thick fog rolled in from the forest, enveloping Bredwardine in a suffocating shroud. Strange occurrences began to plague the village. Livestock were found mutilated, their blood drained. Children spoke of dark figures watching them from the edges of the woods. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence settled over the land. Catherine, consumed by guilt and fear, spent countless hours in the church's library, searching for answers. She found mentions of ancient evils, entities that fed on fear and despair, growing stronger in the presence of suffering. These beings, known as the Morwraiths, were said to be the true harbingers of death, far more terrifying than any vampire. Father Gwillem, too, was haunted by visions and nightmares. The once strong and steadfast priest now looked gaunt and haunted. He prayed for guidance, but the heavens remained silent. One evening, as he knelt before the altar, a cold whisper echoed through the church. "Your village is mine," the voice hissed. "Your souls belong to me." Gwillem's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the full extent of their doom. The ritual had not only failed to banish the darkness, it had drawn the Morwraiths to their village. In their desperation to save Bredwardine, they had opened the door to a far greater evil. Catherine and Father Gwillem knew they had to act, but their options were limited. The old texts offered no solutions, only warnings and despair. One last desperate plan formed in Catherine's mind, a ritual of binding far more dangerous than the last, that might trap the more wraiths within the forest. But the ritual required a sacrifice of unimaginable magnitude. The life of the village itself would be the price. As the fog thickened and the air grew colder, the villagers gathered in the church, driven by fear and the hope that their leaders could once again save them. Catherine stood before them, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what must be done. To save Bredwardine, we must bind the darkness, she announced, her voice breaking. But the cost is everything. Father Gwillem stepped forward, his face ashen. We have no choice. The Moraiths will consume us all if we do nothing. The villagers looked at each other, their faces pale with fear and resignation. They had trusted Catherine and Gwillem once before, and despite the cost, they would trust them again. As midnight approached, the villagers followed Catherine and Father Gwillem to the forest edge, where they prepared the ritual. They formed a circle, joining hands, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Catherine began the incantation, her voice strong and clear, echoing through the silent woods. The ground trembled, and a deep, guttural growl resonated from the earth. Shadows swirled around them, the Moraiths drawn to the power of the ritual. The villagers chanted in unison, their voices a desperate plea to the heavens. As the final words were spoken, a blinding light erupted from the circle, enveloping the village and the forest in a brilliant glow. The Moraiths shrieked in fury and pain, their dark forms disintegrating in the light. For a moment, it seemed as if they had succeeded, but as the light faded, a profound silence fell over Bredwardine. The village stood still, untouched by the passage of time. Catherine and Father Gwillem lay on the ground, their eyes closed, their breaths stilled. The villagers, too, were caught in a moment of eerie tranquility, their lives sacrificed to bind the darkness. Bredwardine had become a ghost village, frozen in time, a monument to the courage and sacrifice of its people. In the years that followed, travelers who ventured near the village spoke of the unnatural stillness and the haunting beauty of the place. The fog never lifted, and the air was always cold. No birds sang, and no animals roamed. The story of Bredwardine and its brave inhabitants faded into legend, a cautionary tale of the price of confronting true evil. And deep within the forest, the ancient yew tree stood as a silent sentinel, guarding the secrets and the souls of those who had once called Bredwardine home. The darkness had been bound, but at a cost too great to bear. The village had saved the world from the Moraiths, but in doing so, it had sacrificed itself, leaving behind only a tragic, silent reminder of their bravery and despair.